Last month, we started this identity and ideation theme. There's been a lot of talk of diversity and inclusion this year, and we wanted to get past those kind of buzzwords and delve deep into what they actually mean. Now, we know that diversity is the makeup of your society, of your business. It's the who, the what, and inclusion is creating an environment where everyone can feel at their best and can succeed and have the opportunities to prove themselves and get to where they need to be. Last month, we had a really interesting panel with people who had grown up in different countries and come here, a Black entrepreneur who had moved from London to Scotland, sharing their experiences in the creative industries, and somebody with a neurodiverse condition about how his experience made him decide to start his own business to help that community. As we're celebrating Black History Month this October, we're really pleased to have 4 inspirational female leaders from very different backgrounds and very different industries here to share their stories of their business journeys here in Scotland. To help navigate this huge subject, I've brought in a member of the Startup Ground community and my friend, entrepreneur Janet. Janet, could you just introduce yourself and tell us why this is such an important topic for you, please?
Lovely. Thanks for that, Nick. And hi, everyone. Thank you for giving up your evening to come and listen to us all today. I have no doubt you're going to get a lot out of it, and I'm super excited. And I'm also sitting in my corner office here fangirling about our panel. So apologies if I get a bit excited or animated. As Nick shared, I'm Janet. I'm an entrepreneur of a couple of businesses, which I'll tell you about soon. My day job, in order to pay for that, because entrepreneurship is expensive. I work for Accenture as a technology consultant, and that's normally with things like working on platform transformations for the various banks and other financial services institutions that we have here. In addition to that, I have a keen interest in AI, so applied intelligence, or rather machine learning, that kind of thing, mainly in the ethics side of that. So that even maintains, or rather that includes things like ensuring that bias and algorithms and the data that machine learning is trained on is as fair and equitable as possible. In terms of the couple of businesses I mentioned, one of them is Onyia Gifts, which is a sustainable, luxury and impactful gifting business. And the other one is TivityPod, a platform for booking children's activities. And again, throughout today, I'm sure some of the information about that will come out. But one of the main reasons that just entrepreneurship and the inclusion as well as equity in entrepreneurship is really close to my heart is because I myself have seen and experienced the highs and lows of entrepreneurship from various lenses, be that from being a younger person, be that from being a woman, be that from being Black, even from having grown up in Newcastle and not being in the epicenter, for example, of London or maybe even Edinburgh, where the action goes down. So I'm really excited to just unpick a lot of these with our panelists today. Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Janet. So I'd like to kick off this theme before we introduce our panel with a quote from the Indian politician and social reformer B.R. Ambedkar. And those of you who were at the last event might remember this. I've actually paraphrased it to be a bit more gender neutral, given our panel here tonight. And he says, "Unlike a drop of water which loses its identity when it joins the ocean, one does not lose theirs being in society in which they live. One's life is independent. We are born not of the development of society alone, but for the development of oneself." So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce our panel this evening. Hopefully you've had a chance to read their bios on our event page, but I always think it's actually more interesting to hear what people have to say about themselves. So with that in mind, I'd like to throw first to Briana Pagado. Briana, how are you tonight?
Hi everyone, lovely to see you virtually, and forgive me, I'm recovering from quite a serious migraine, so if I look like I'm squinting, that will be why. Thanks so much, Nick, for inviting me here tonight. I'm the Executive Director of Creative Edinburgh, which is a creative network, one of the oldest in the UK, that supports 4,800 creative industries, businesses and individuals that work internationally and nationally in the creative industries, which includes everything from drama, TV, film, television, to design and craft and further. My background's actually in sustainable developments, and I've spent a lot of my time throughout my entrepreneurial journey running and being involved in the social enterprise community. So I ran a social enterprise that I set up in 2014 called the Edinburgh Student Arts Festival, which was about addressing barriers that young people face to the creative industries to entry. And I also ran a conductancy called POVO, which was a kind of service design thinking led creative consultancy that helped people unlock their creativity and creative potential to solve problems. So that's a bit about me, and I'm sure you'll hear more later. So thanks so much, Nick.
Thanks, Briana. Okay, so I'd like to introduce Briana Maya next. Briana, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been doing.
Sure. My name is Briana Maya. I don't know why I start with my name it's there. But yes, I'm the founder of Prespect. I'm also working with AI employability and diversity inclusion. My background ranges from acting and performance, which I bring into what I do. Tech, I love tech. So listening to Janet was just like, yay, another tech person. And yes, what have we been doing in the last few months it's been really navigating this startup world. Although my experience started with Snoovies, which was a short film app, which is still going on, this has been a different kind of environment, and just to be a part of this growing world in everything else that's happening, it has been, yeah, we're gonna be diving into it, but it's great to be here and just to share the platform with everybody else.
Thank you, Briana. And we are thrilled to be joined by Moneymatics co-founders Helen, Roger, and Tina Matembe. Now, Tina is currently on a train leaving the dystopian hellhole that is London, so her connection might come in and out. But would you guys like to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your journey?
Thank you for having us on, Nick and Dick. Thank you for inviting us to this. I apologize for being on the train at this time. It was a mix-up with the times. But my name is Tina Matembe, and I'm the co-founder of Moneymatics, which is a financial education platform. We started out trying to help young people to learn how to manage money, the basics of money management. And we're trying to do that both physically using workshops and practical experiences, but also using software so that young people can understand the journeys of money that are required. Over to you, Helen.
Hi, my name is Helena. Some people call me Helen, other people call me Helena, but there's a history to that, which I can tell you about if you want, but for time I will not. And I am Tina's co-founder. As she said, we both work in Moneymatics, and it's a fintech business. We've been at it for maybe just over 2 years. And we are very excited to be here to tell our stories, what we've learned. We have both been in Scotland. I've been in Scotland over 14 years, and Tina has been here maybe just over 12 years as well. So we have loads of interesting stories to tell you about. We both worked a lot in the social impact communities, and hence our business is always confused as being a not-for-profit, but we are a limited company as Moneymatics.
Thanks, Helena. Thanks, Tina. Yeah, that's not a great start, me calling you Helen, if we're going to be talking about identity tonight, is it? My bad. Janet, would you like to kick us off then?
Yes, would absolutely love to. So just to get us started, and ladies, I'd just like you to pretend that there's no one else here and it's just you guys talking to me. I know you're probably going to already be, but I just want you to just feel like you can speak very openly, honestly, and candidly about what we're going to be talking about today, really. So it's just us ladies having a little chit chat on a Wednesday evening. But just to kick us off, I'd like to explore your experiences in terms of growing up and how that's shaped your journey in your businesses and in your leadership style, or even in your day jobs if they're not businesses. So if I could start, please, with Briana, just if you could give the audience who aren't here a little insight into yourself growing up, and again, that transition into Scotland, that would be great.
Sure, thanks so much, Janet. Well, it's a funny question, because I giggle about this when I say this, but excuse me, I was raised by two parents that were incredibly successful in their careers. One, my father was an entrepreneur. He passed away sadly a couple of months ago, but lived in Angola, 2 countries north of South Africa, on the western coast of the continent of Africa. My mom's from the States and is African American, but for two people that grew up in very kind of significant times from a civil rights standpoint in both of their countries, and were able to be successful in their careers. My father in oil and my mom in politics, and also then telecommunications and PR. Thankfully, I had great role models, but I would really say that what's driven me and what really kind of shaped my personality from a young age is I went to Montessori school from the age of 2 to 4. And for those of you that don't know Maria Montessori and her philosophy is very much about having, well, I wouldn't say having no rules, but maybe not always following the rules that authority sets, and finding your own way. And I remember very vividly having my shoelace come undone when I was 3 or 4 and asking my teacher to help me tie it. And she said, no, here's a map and you can figure it out yourself. And I think that kind of led me throughout my life. I think the Montessori method is a very empathic method as well, and a kind one. But I came to Edinburgh in 2010. I've been here for now 10 years to study international relations and sustainable development, but very much from a young age, always had a passion for politics, for activism, for the arts and creative industries, and for the planet. And I'd say that for me, for someone whose family is part of their family is in oil, I'm the environmentalist in the family. And I'm very much driven by work that has not only a social impact, but a genuine one. I think there's a lot of talk of, social impact investment, social enterprise. There's a lot of misconceptions around what that actually means. And I think that it comes down to creative people, because I think creative people were the first mavericks, were the first disruptors, were the first people willing to be on the fringe of society and push their ideas forward and reflect society back to us and really go after the really risky ideas. So I think creative people were the original entrepreneurs and continue to be. And so that's why I'm in this space. The work that I do now is actually also very driven around data and data-driven innovation in the creative industries. But from that standpoint, yeah, I think a rebel, a creative person, someone that doesn't like authority or following rules. And that might be why I am where I am today.
I love that so much. And actually, one of the things that I would like to come back to later on, which you mentioned a little bit about, is the privilege element of things, because I understand that, yes, we all are on varying scales of the privilege slide when it comes to background and the jobs we're in now and stuff. So I'd like to explore that a bit more. But yeah, thank you. Briana, how about you? So you don't sound like you have a broad Glaswegian accent. I know you don't, but I'd like you to give me a bit more of your background, please, and about getting into work as well.
Sure, that's shocking. I thought it was all Edinburgh, but no. Well, actually, listening to Briana there, I was born in Angola, but my parents are Congolese. So I'm a child of refugees. We left when I was about 4 or 5. We moved to London, so that's where the accent comes from. And then we lived in the East End. Again, that's where the accent comes from. So I'm an East Ender at heart still. So shocked with you, Nick, with the comment about London, but we'll come back to that. So yeah, I grew up in London, and my experience of that is, well, my parents being refugees. My dad was in Angola, was a footballer, and all this fancy stuff. He was the G of his place. But once we moved to London, it was a completely different story. So my mum was a cleaner, my dad was working in a warehouse, But my dad was really adamant that whatever happens in our home, the money was coming from us, right? So there was no benefits and things like that. It was really like the work ethics, just seeing the work that they put in to keep us clothed and dressed, and it was a good home and being able to afford the lifestyle that they wanted, but with the hard work. So I grew up with that. And obviously with the area that I grew up in, seeing the people around me, I had that representation, that, you know, seeing people running their own business, people that looked like me doing their own stuff. And I suppose that's then what's driven me is the background that I've been in, the people that I've been around, and knowing that whatever happens in my life, my history, my past, that doesn't make up who I am. You know, I'm very much of a, I don't use any negative experience that I've had in my life. I like to look at it as a fuel to motivate me, which is where I am now. And I love that term, being a bit of a rebel. I'm the creative side of my family. We're all very much in the academic, you know, lawyers and doctors and whatnot. I wanted to be a pop star, a singer, and the complete opposite. But I still had to get my education. So I got my degrees and all my fancy stuff, and went into acting for a bit. And obviously when my daughter came, that shifted, you know, that privilege of acting and living that bohemian lifestyle was just not affordable. Could not do that at all. So I started to really adapt. And again, just power back into my world. The way I grew up with my parents was like, there was no excuse, right? If you need to do something, you have to do it. If you need to achieve something, you have to do it. You find a way. And my way was always education. Whatever I needed to learn it. Go back to education, learn something. And in Scotland, you have it great. The fact that you can, you know, your education is paid for. I think when I first moved here, I was just like, what? I'm not leaving. Not just to take your education. I love Scotland as well. But it was just that if you see it, there's opportunity to create it. There is a struggle. It's being aware of our reality as well. There is a struggle to it, but there's also opportunity to make things happen. And this is where I am today. We'll come back to it. I could go on for days, but I won't.
You know what, we are barely in, and so far I've got that we need to be rebellious. I've got that we need to make sure that our past doesn't define our future.
Yeah, keep going.
Literally. So straight on there then, please, next if we could just have Helen with the same question, please. Just give us a bit about your background and that transition to being here in Scotland.
For sure. So I'm also from Uganda. I'm sorry, I'm also from Africa, not Angola, but Uganda. Yeah, like the other two speakers as well, my parents really shaped where I am today in terms of entrepreneurship, even though they were entrepreneurs themselves. You'll probably relate from an African household. You have to go and get an education. You have to be a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, or something like that. So entrepreneurship was part of something that they did to survive, but everybody really believed in education. So my mom really was always traveling, doing business. I'm from a large family of 9 children. So it was really a lot of survival and helping each other out, and, you know, stealing each other's things and food and stuff. So it was not always straight sailing. But I guess that whole situation of being 9 children and, you know, probably your mom traveling most of the time, and you having to take control at home. So the older ones would have to take control and become the parents, while my parents were out doing business and working. And I think you grow up quite quickly, and you become responsible quite quickly, because you somehow you have to survive, right? And again, I went to boarding school for most of my life, and that as well was a big part of what shaped who I am today, because you don't have your mom there, you don't have your dad, you just have, you don't have your sisters or any helpers. So you have to thrive somehow in that community, but make sure that you're still learning, you're still washing your clothes, you're still not losing your uniforms, you're still saving up your grab, your biscuits that your parents will bring for you, and stuff like that. So it was an interesting growing up season for me. And when I came to Scotland a couple of years ago, it was quite normal. Like going to a new place or a different place or starting afresh was quite normal, because I'd moved from primary school boarding school to a secondary school boarding school, where sometimes you don't know anybody and you just have to start all over again. So moving to Scotland was such an amazing experience for me, because I had been on a plane and I'd been to an African country, but going to Europe was something that was, wow, I'm going to Europe. And that was, yeah, I was a bit shocked culturally when I came here. My sister and myself lived in a flat, and I just didn't believe that you can be in a flat and not know your neighbor, and not talk to your neighbor, and not interact with people on the bus. It was just strange for me. It was a culture shock, but it was also very good, because it showed me like loads of different opportunities, things that I'd read about in books. I was really excited to experience. So that's a little bit about my growing up and where my leadership skills come from, or my resilience skills come from.
Thank you so much for that, Helena. That's actually fascinating. And then last but not least, Tina, please, I'd really like to hear again how your background has translated into starting a tech business here.
Okay, so sorry, because the trains literally stopped, so you're going to hear a big announcement soon. But yeah, so I come from Uganda originally, but well, there we go. Apologies, guys.
It's fun. We've gone from planes from Africa to trains to Edinburgh.
I know. Yes, so I come from Uganda originally, but I grew up in the capital, in the city center, so in the main city, in the capital city, and my parents were business owners. We had a thriving business that I grew up as a part of, and interestingly, growing up, I did not have any recognition of who I was I never ever had definitions about being a woman or a Black person or a girl. I was just a person that was very, very well equipped, because my parents had run the business from before we were born. And from when I was 4 or 5 years old, we would sit at the table together to make decisions for the business. So in my mind, I was a CEO, I was a manager from the day I was born, and I didn't have this issues of being a woman or being a Black person, or that it was just I was a person that had a good head on my head that could get things done. So I was brought up to be in problem solving mode, right? If something's wrong, I have to fix a problem. I have to manage people. There's this silly game that we realized later on in life that actually they were playing us, because we'd sit at the table every Monday morning, sit at the table, go through all the issues that's happening in the workshop. They had a factory. So we'd sit down and they'll be like, oh, we're having this problem in HR. What suggestions do you have? And many, many times, my suggestion would be to fire the staff members. And only when I grew up, I realized, actually, that guy is still there. He still works at the factory. He never, ever got fired. That was a recommendation I gave. And I thought that I was the HR or the CEO or, the top management of the business. That guy had been fired. So we're like, guys, you were playing us this whole time. We were doing boardroom meetings and you were lying to us. So I just grew up expecting that I had to do my own thing. I had to run my own business. I was meant to be solving problems. And when I came to the UK, that's the mode I came in. I came in, right here we are. Like the others have said, one of the big things for African parents is an education. You must get educated. So I had to get educated. And you're going to start a business at some point, but you have to get, you have to be a lawyer, a doctor, and all these things. So I did that. I did my law degree and then moved to the UK, came to Scotland. And one of the biggest shockers for me was how people related with money. It was just so different, so shocking how within 3 months of me and my husband arriving, we had letters through the door with people telling us we could take, couches on finance. And I was like, that's crazy. as far as I'm concerned, you plan for this stuff, you have one business that's dedicated to doing your interior decoration. You have another business that's dedicated to paying children's school fees. How is it that I can just get a loan to buy couches, you know? And that was my first culture shock, and a lot of other things that just kept going on. So when I had children of my own, and they were starting to have this, it was a mix, because our household was running the way we were brought up in Uganda, where you plan for what you have and you work for it, and then you like, right, so money coming from this source is what's going to go toward. And my daughter, who was maybe about, had her dad's debit card was a magic wand. If she wants anything, daddy should be able to just fling this card and we should be able to get stuff done. And so that's what led us, we're like, oh, no, this cannot happen. We have to solve this. There has to be a good balance. Yes, it's amazing to have access to credit, but goodness me, we also have to be able to understand and plan for money and work for it and set up businesses or do jobs to earn the money. So that's the particular culture shock that, you know, led me into doing what we do at Mathematics. But also just that invisibility, as far as I was concerned, I was just a human being that could solve problems, had a head on me. I wasn't a woman, I wasn't anything, I was somebody that had to solve a problem. So I think that's how I think entrepreneurship is woven in my DNA, because I've been at the boardroom table from 5, and I just expect that that's something that everyone needs to be doing. It's the way of life that I know.
I love that. That's amazing. I'm going to start having
I
board
hope I
meetings with
haven't
my
cut out
family.
there.
No, you were great, Tina. Don't stress about it. So listen, in the context of this year, with everything that's been happening, something I've been speaking a lot to social entrepreneurs about, and what I think is really interesting here is we're all here in different industries. You know, we've got financial tech represented, we've got education and employment and mindset coaching, and also unlocking the creative industries and potential of people. But all of that is about helping people and supporting people to be their best versions of themselves. And I wonder what lessons or what priorities have changed for our panel, given everything that's happened this year. Briana, I would like to start with you, because we spoke earlier about priorities changing and this idea of leaving a legacy. Could you talk to us about that?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in terms of what, a lot of things changing at really fast at the same time. But I suppose for now is that urgency to make what we do have a proper impact, that the people that are coming to us is not, you know, we avoid using employability, for example, in terms of what we're doing, because we want to think that we are actually supporting people to see the capability, to see, or to even ignite that ambition that they had. So in terms of what we work with people, it's getting them into work and all that stuff. But I think we've just stopped seeing people. And what's happened now with the pandemic and with COVID, with everything else, we've had to sort of step back and really see, you know, what's going on, that individual that's coming to us, that, yeah, it's just opening up that space. And for me personally, what's changed is just taking more risk. I mean, I am very risky with the type of stuff that we do, but it's really taking that risk that if we need to change quickly and adapt quickly, let's do it. We've done it during the lockdown. You know, we've adapted the offering so fast, and it's helped, rather than sort of waiting and asking for that permission before we do. We get it done, and then obviously ask for forgiveness later, or we let the people know how it's happened. And it was scary at first. It was scary. Suddenly we're having to make quick decisions that we know is going to help somebody, and then that's just snowballed. And we're finding that, you know what, we're going to continue. We have to continue in that vein, that we're asking for things to change. We want things to change, but if we are capable in our own small pockets of things to make it happen, why not take that risk and go for it and see what happens?
So this is something which I think caused a lot of concern to people in business early on in the pandemic, where very quickly they realized that what they dedicated their life to 9 till 5 and everything they put their energy and stress that was ruining their relationships and their sleep, it actually didn't contribute anything positive to the world. And we've seen a huge uptake in community interest initiatives popping up all over the place from normal people. Could you just give us an outline, because Prespect is a career coaching organisation, but with government funding that you were getting for that, could you talk us through some of the stuff that you did reactively to support your people at the start of this year?
Yeah, so we started off just regrouping. We created Safe Space Online because we were running live workshops and suddenly we had to stop. But then we realized that a lot of the workshop that we were doing, it wasn't just people coming to us for that employability support. It was almost a community as well. So there's a lot of people that are coming, isolated. We've had people that were taking other organizations and realizing that we were giving them a community friendship first, seeing them and then providing them the service that they needed, looking at them for the individual. But then we slowly found that suddenly we had, we work a lot with Black and ethnic minority groups, but we also work with international students. And we suddenly had people contacting us and letting us know that, I couldn't come to the workshop today because, we run out of food and we couldn't get access, and, and then slowly opening up to us because there was trust there. They had no recourse to public fund, or they couldn't access a food bank because they didn't know how to get there. There was just a lot of couldn'ts, but there was a lot of noise about access to this. We got all these things happening, but it wasn't reaching people. And we're a very small organization. We're very digital. So what we had to do real quick was find out what was available. We did a research, and found there was a lot of food boxes available. For example, M&S had the emergency food box, Morrison's had food box, and we thought, how can we take a portion of our funding and then give people a list and say, let us know what you need, we'll order it for you and have it delivered. And it was just a quick little something to do, but we just realized the impact of that was that people were then accessing nourishing food, not to say anything against food banks and the availability of the food resources that are out there, but how many tins of soup can a person get to survive something like this, especially when you've got children, vegetables, just simple things like that. But being able to provide people with a list of something that they could select themselves, giving them that dignity of choice, that a lot of people felt they were losing, that control they were losing. So bringing that in then meant that they were able to focus back into employability, but then we were able to give them information in terms of what was happening with the labor market. Things were changing. We're coming across people that are working in the care industry, or coming across people that work in retail, hospitality, them having to adapt into the digital space. And then we also had issues with lack of data or access to connectivity. So it's really that step back and think and ask and allow people that space to say, I don't have, how can you support me? And just jumping in there. The funding that we've got with the SIP fund has really been helpful because it allowed us that flexibility. We're able to just send an email and say, this week, this is how we're dealing with this situation. This is what we've done. Next week is going to change, and it allowed us that flexibility. And I think the confidence of being able to just go for it and do it has been really helpful, which I know other type of funding, that's just not going to be possible. So then that made us really realize that we need to make ourselves independent of funding. I started creating courses, which I'm selling as bespoke. And then that gives us revenue to come back into the company so that we're not worried about accessing funding that sometimes just we can't tick the box for, So it's really, you're having to think fast and you're having to do things real quick. And then also being aware that you need that space to look after yourself. So this is probably my reflecting night. It's been so fast. I can't even explain some of the other stuff that we've done in between, because sometimes we get a message from somebody saying, thank you for something. And you're just thinking, I can't even remember when we did this, but I'm so happy that you're okay and safe.
It's incredible. And you mentioned the funding word there, Briana. The creative industries have not been favoured hugely by the government in terms of funding. As somebody who represents a community of creative entrepreneurs and people who maybe don't even consider themselves to be entrepreneurs, how has your conscience and your compassion changed throughout this year in terms of how you serve that community?
I don't think anything's changed in terms of our compassion and our approach, but it means that we've been more vocal about what's needed for the community. The Creative Industries Federation did a survey and report, and I think they found that 90% of people in the creative industries and creative businesses and individuals have lost 70% of their income in the first 2 to 3 months of lockdown. I'm involved with a Scottish Government really advisory group to recommend what government should do to support the creative sector post-COVID. And the UK government has unlocked £97 million, which is the biggest kind of bailout package the creative sector has ever received for COVID response and recovery. That said, I think there's a real misunderstanding and a real kind of missed opportunity here around the creative sector and creative industries. I think a lot of people will sit at home using their laptop designed by a designer, sitting at a chair designed by a craft person, leaving a home designed by an architect, walking down streets designed by city planners, eating food that's been marketed to them by people in the creative sector, and not really seeing kind of creative people in the creative sector that are spread across all industries as essential workers. I'm in no way saying that they're more essential than our healthcare providers and our workers on the front lines, but I do think that there's a real issue in terms of how creative people are valued. And at Creative Edinburgh, you know, we already provide legal counsel through Anderson Strather, and we provide free kind of digital events. We digitized our entire program to support people in the creative sector with emergency COVID response drop-in sessions. We've launched a new digital skills program to look at how to support people to pivot and upskill and kind of gain new skills and opportunities to kind of shift and pivot their business models. But what I really think is, I look at kind of the privileged background that I had growing up in a middle class family that, you know, my grandparents were very working class, and I saw a lot of social mobility in my family, even though my mother was a single parent for quite a long time after my parents separated. But even as a person that had access to education, that could afford to come to Edinburgh, even though the year I came to university here was the most expensive year and the most competitive year for university applications in the United States of America's history. So there are some reasons why I came over here. I think my concern is that diversity in the creative sector and cultural sector and creative industries is really under threat. We knew this well before COVID, that the number of BAME people, women, people from disabled backgrounds, queer people in the creative industries was on the decline. When we look at the actual makeup of our society and the stories we should be telling, and also the fact that culture should not really be driven by, for lack of a better term, everyone, by colonialist tastes and viewpoints. You know, I think that actually we are kind of, given everything that's happened this summer, yes, there might be a bit of a shift in perspective of, okay, what parts of our society are designed to be unbalanced and designed to oppress people that don't look like a certain group. And I think the creative industries and creative sector can help tell that story, but I think actually needs to be invested in and valued for our society to develop and to continue to grow and continue to be fair. Because when you think about how many things creative people touch that you interact with on your day-to-day life, it's everything.
Wow, that was a lot to unpack there, Briana. That's spot on. And yeah, people are taking the creative industries for granted. And there's this whole Twitter storm the other week about people retraining and how patronizing the image of the ballerina tying her shoelace was that's going to go work in cyber was. But throwing it over to Helena, is this something that resonates with you? You mentioned at the start that, you know, you are a tech business, you're a limited company, but people often see you as a social enterprise. Do you think that you've had to hide your social agenda to be taken seriously in the fintech sector?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. We have had to try and over-explain ourselves sometimes. Many times we have been, you know, when we're telling our story or when we're telling how we started our business, you know, oh, so who's your customer? So is it the Black people that is your customer? No, we're helping everybody. You know, it's financial literacy. It doesn't know color, it doesn't know background, it doesn't know boy or girl, it's financial literacy. And many times we do find the fintech sector is quite male dominated, middle-aged, class type of sector, and it can be quite intimidating as well, being Black women in the tech sector. That's not quite easy to navigate sometimes. And yeah, so we have social impact. Our business is a social impactful business, but it is it's a profit-making business, and we must be seen like that. A lot of investors, pre-COVID anyway, it was really hard to try and get any investors interested in your business because there's no gain, there's no profit. What will they get out of it really? Investors want money back. And when you try and explain your business, it sounds like, oh, so you're doing good, you're just doing good things in the community. Yes, we are, but we also want to be sustainable. We also want to make profit, and we want to make social impact for sure. And there's nothing to say there's anything wrong with being a social business or a social impact business, but it can be confusing in the sector where we are anyway. I think Tina is gone. I was going to ask her if she could add something to that, but yeah, it's quite, it can be difficult and confusing.
So this is something that's come up quite a few times at Startup Grind is, Scotland is gaining this great reputation for socially driven businesses that make money, right? Tech for good is a term that people are throwing about the place, but there is this concern that investors do kind of see it as soft and not investable. And I wonder if the takeaways from this year, where hopefully we're not taking humans for granted at every level, will help to create that shift where we see the benefit in all of our lives by creating tech or businesses that can help humans. Am I hoping for too much too soon, perhaps?
No, I think you're quite right. I think COVID has been a great experience for that, to make people see what's important, to make people see that helping people is very, very important. There's loads of businesses that have pulled together and come together through this whole season to help other people that they would not normally. And in terms of investors as well, they've seen that, okay, so social businesses are something that is investable, that can bring back a profit. And one of the things that we learned anyway, myself and Tina, we're part of the Saltire Fellowship. And we went to Babson, and one of the things that we learned there is that you cannot make a difference without money. You have to make money, any business, and that's sometimes that's something that social businesses miss. Myself and Tina, we run another a not-for-profit business, which is helping young Black kids to integrate and find their self-identity and confidence in Edinburgh. And before we did that Saltire Fellowship, we thought, well, we had to depend on grants and funding and money, and by the time we came back, we're like, no, we have to be sustainable. We have to make sure that we're making profit. And a lot of social entrepreneurs, we excuse the side of profit. And I think investors are starting to see that, yes, if social businesses can make a profit, then that means they're investable. Then that means they can get a good return on investment for their money.
I absolutely agree. I mean, we could do a whole event about corporate social responsibility in terms of investment, but you're quite right in that. I believe businesses should be judged on their impact as well as their intention. And if you don't have that solid business foundations, then you're only going to be able to reach a certain point and help a certain amount of people. With that being said, Janet, can you get us back on the identity track, please?
Yeah, not at all. And actually, I'd like to stay a little bit on this topic that we're talking about from a gender perspective, but also from a finance perspective. So again, the British Business Bank, I think yesterday or today, brought out their latest report, which is on my Twitter, and I'll share the link here as well. And it talked about 4 of the things or the main elements that were barriers or that held some people back in business. And one of the stats from there, which I wasn't surprised about, was that the the fact that female business owners of all ethnicities experience significantly lower turnover than male entrepreneurs. Now, again, that's not necessarily a surprise for us, but one of the main things that actually really got me was female entrepreneurs from ethnic minority backgrounds experience the biggest disparities. We know there's a gender gap, we know there's an ethnicity gap. We put the two of them together, and this is one group that really is being overlooked. And I guess this is a question for everybody, but I'd like to start with you first, Briana. What are your thoughts about being a woman in your industry and sector? And do you actually feel as if you are needed to represent everyone in there?
Yeah, it's at first when you kind of realize that, you kind of feel a little bit of a shock on your shoulders, like that's a lot, but I don't shy away from a challenge. But I just feel that just hearing that for me is fuel. It's like, right, we need to change that. And I think that comes down to that representation. We don't see a lot of Black female business people in well, let's start with Scotland. I don't see a lot of it. So I'm supposing that when people don't see it or don't hear, or, you know, I'm watching, I follow a lot of stuff on Instagram in terms of who do I support? I want to put my money back into women-owned business. That's my own conscious decision at the moment, you know, of seeing what's happening now. But when you don't see it, how do you invest in it? How do you trust in it? And just listen to what Helena was just saying there in terms of how investors react before COVID, you know, the lack of people investing in your business. Is that a bias thing? Is that because they're looking at you and thinking that you're not going to do it? Not just your business, but you as an individual, as a woman, who's going to buy your product? Who's going to invest in your product? But yeah, I just find it's really about changing that. It's changing that perception. If I can do what I'm doing now, do it well and make it successful, I'm hoping that somebody else who looks like me who wants to do business can say, well, she can do it, I can do it too. And it's really changing that. And sometimes it can be a bit hard when you think about it, when you have days where things are just going a bit, oh, this is a bit much. But when it's really great, like this last few months has been awesome, I'm just like, right, keep going. All that hard work is worth it. We can make that change. And I think now is a time to do it, where everybody's supporting, a lot of people throwing in that we want to be an ally, we want to contribute. I think then it's like, you know, well, show us, right? Invest in us, buy our products, buy our services, and let's get us up there.
That is amazing. Thank you. And Briana, I'm really interested in hearing what this is like in the creative industry.
I was given a stat at an event last week that only 3% of Black women are CEOs in the creative industries across the UK, so I'm part of a 3%. And I think some of it is you can't be what you can't see, but actually my focus is more on the systemic and structural problems. So, you know, if we have boards that are not 50% women and men, and that doesn't even include trans people, non-binary people, genderqueer people, if we have kind of so many biases that people hold due to racism, due to the patriarchy, due to so many kind of embedded and ingrained belief systems we have in our society, things won't change. So I think it's important for us to invest and important for us to work our way through and be representative, but I think it's also unfair for the onus to be entirely on us when actually, you know, we tell little girls in school that, you know, we ask them how they, we ask them about what they wear and how they look, and we equate so many things at such a young age for boys and girls to very different things. And actually, I think that our education systems need to change. I think that in order for us to actually see change kind of throughout our society, we need a combination of investing in Black women and Black-led businesses and marginalized groups, and seeing more equity within our boards and governance and leadership, but also we need to change our approach society-wide. I think though within the creative industries, and back to some of that conversation about social enterprise, you know, I think it's still like 60% of social enterprises are led by women. And I wonder if there's a kind of correlation between a lack of understanding of social enterprises being profitable, profit-driven businesses and the fact that they are led by women, because I think there is a bias that kind of falls into the social enterprise and purpose-driven business community that needs to be addressed. I also think that there's something really key here in terms of what we need to do to sort of shift this power, because it comes back to where the power lies and who wants to maintain that power and not redistribute it or bring someone else on that doesn't look like them because it's uncomfortable, they're unused to it. I have a very good friend that runs a company that has noticed she's received more investment and more interest in her company if she signs off her emails as a man. And she actually can prove that people will pay her invoices more quickly, will respond to her emails more quickly. Her name is Alex, so she just doesn't correct anyone if they say, oh, Mr. Alex. And, you know, we've really got some serious issues in terms of our own beliefs in what people can achieve and accomplish based on all of these different factors. I think unconscious bias training and a number of other things will address it, but it's going to take some time.
Excellent, thank you. Not excellent about the situation we're in, but that viewpoint. And again, this one for you, Tina, if you are able to join us, I'd like to know specifically, I've already spoken about the gender side of things and being a woman. I've mentioned about the business side of things, technology, fintech in Scotland. So for you, how have you found that as a woman in technology in Scotland in the financial services?
I think the first realization for us, you know, as being, you know, doing fintech was initially we're not even looking to do a fintech product. It was about solving problems, trying to skate, box, everything is put into a certain quadrant. So we're doing financial education, we're doing financial literacy, we're solving the problem using technology, but that should not box it into a certain quarter. So you automatically find yourself being you're a Black woman that's trying to do a fintech product, and so automatically you're either filling up a statistic or you are up against other people that are not in the same space. And the other problem that we had was this whole feeling that financial literacy or financial education was a socially driven, you know, element of things. So you're not expected or you're frowned upon when you're trying to go for venture capital, for example. It's like, oh, that's something that charities should be doing. But it's like, no, it's not. It's technology that's meant to be helping to solve a problem. So
I'm not sure if we've lost Tina there. Apologies, because you were on such a good train of thought as well. But we'll hopefully be able to catch you.
Said, that's just conscience that drives you downside, you being a middle-aged man. So a big thing that we've had to learn, a very, very big key element has had to be adaptability. One of the key things I feel as a Black woman in business is I have to be very strong, and I have to consciously prep myself and be in the right mind frame to go out and face the world. And then I have to be ready to adapt to anything that's thrown at me. So I feel like you're constantly juggling, you know, many balls. And you know, myself and Helen are always saying, well, how do you position this in a way that speaks to this type of audience? You know, you're trying to portray yourself according to a certain type of audience. Otherwise, you just won't be listened to. So you find yourself having to be very, very adaptable very quickly. And that's been a key thing. And it's a theme across, I think. Speaking to other female entrepreneurs, it's a big challenge, having to position yourself, your slide deck when you out present. In how you put the slide deck across matters, just then you're not very statistic, then the problem's not very clear. And so it starts marginalizing people. And so we need a way that we can start analyzing problems holistically, not looking at one area of issues, but addressing business or society as a whole from a holistic lens and trying to look at it from different points of view. But you find that most of the players in the market, most of the stakeholders are looking through one lens. And we just need to break those barriers and help people to see things through multiple lenses. And when you're a child, you do that. My daughter is 11 and she's able to perceive things from very many different points of views. Why can't we do it as adults? Why can't that not happen in businesses? and you try to put on many different hats to understand problems. But from a fintech point of view, the key thing is adaptability, trying to package something in a way that's palatable for the market at the moment, no matter that may not necessarily solve a problem that's pertinent. So sometimes your prioritization ends up changing. You're trying to help a certain, you're trying to solve a certain problem, but the way you go about it has to conform with society.
Excellent, thank you. And just before I forget there, David, great question about AI and bias, and I even missed it there, sorry. The unconscious bias training. I'd love for us to come back on that later on, especially for yourself, Briana. The next thing I'd like us to talk about really is about the Black Lives Matter movement, and specifically being Black in Scotland in business, regardless what sector we are in. Now, earlier on this year, it prompted a lot of businesses to look at their culture, their practices, their brand values, lots of things like that. For some, it was a time for action. For some, it was a time for reflection, or to just sit back, pause, and just listen and learn. For others who'd actually grown up with racism as a constant part of their identity, it was finally a time of, I told you so, I've been telling you so, this is what it now is, it's time to speak up and be heard. So I'd like to hear from all of you, please, and I'll start with Briana first, who all of you were vocal on social media platforms and in other places at the height of it and since then. So firstly, Briana, for you, how was that time for you? Did you feel a responsibility to speak up, either just for yourself or for your employer and workplace, or even for your whole sector? Did you feel that pressure, or am I just putting words in your mouth? And again, how did that impact you both personally and professionally?
I'm constantly under a microscope. That's just the reality of being a Black woman in a sector where there aren't many of us, and because I'm just vocal anyway. I think that our community in the creative industries had a moment of pause and reflection. I think that really what's happening is our community at Creative Edinburgh really represents the sole traders, the freelancers, the companies of one or two, the startups, and some bigger organizations. But I think that traditional institutions in Scotland, the tastemakers, museums and galleries Scotland, the National Library of Scotland, I'm not saying these specifically, but these larger institutions really had to take a moment to reflect on what content they were creating, who's on the walls in these museums, who did they give voice to over others. But I think actually more importantly, it was a question of, for me, and something that I find frustrating being American in Scotland, I think for the first time, this narrative that racism and Black Lives Matter is an American problem is finally being put to one side. I helped set up Black History Month at the University of Edinburgh for the first time in its history 10 years ago, and I was shocked to come here and find out there was no such thing being celebrated at the university. And I think actually Scotland's finally, and maybe not yet, but slowly starting to come to terms with its role in the slave trade and its role in being involved in kind of suppressing and oppressing an entire population of people, and actually what that means. In the current day, we had discussions about renaming monuments, about famous Scotsmen and Scots people that actually, I wouldn't say that their history needs to be rewritten, but actually needed to be examined was really important. I think from a personal standpoint, it was a very traumatic time, having to see on social media Black bodies being brutalized and just shared in a way that I think wasn't intended to be negative, but a collective moment of, oh, this is terrible, this is happening, racism. I think back to what you said, it's like, yes, I've been living this my whole life, we all have. I think what I saw that was really positive through that was a lot of people in our community and a lot of people I know taking the time to pause, reflect, unlearn, think about their role in racism, in white supremacy, try to understand actually how this is more of a systemic problem. It's not just calling someone a mean name or crossing the road when you see a Black person walk past. So I think the conversation is more mature now. I think the conversation is more accountable. I think people are taking action, and I think it's really positive. But yes, as a Black person living in a country that I think hasn't fully come to terms with its role in racism and in kind of the whole construction of this, it's been challenging, but I think it's been very important.
Wow, I'm not even sure where, what, or yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I really hope that everyone who's on here listening can really just feel and hear and see just what that experience was, a minutiae of it, because obviously we can never actually fully be there. That's enough of me for now. I'll just let Nick now just come up and yeah, get the conversation continue moving.
So I'm really interested to delve into that, and Briana, we've spoken before about, you know, the people who you serve in your community, your beneficiaries are from minority ethnic backgrounds who are already struggling with finances and lack of employment. Could you talk to us a little bit about the responsibility you felt you had to speak up and be part of that conversation, but also how that impacted yourself and how you managed to separate those different energies when you felt you had to be strong for a community?
I'll be honest with you, I think that at the very beginning of it, and we were in the middle of diversity work when a lot of it was kicking off, I had to really manage my personal rage, because it was an unnatural rage. I'm a very calm person, but suddenly I just felt this bubble of everything that, just minor things that we suppress, you know, how we navigate ourselves, how we conduct ourselves. And suddenly it was almost like opening a can of worms of wounds and feelings and things that were said that I'll let that one go because it's only a minor thing. You know, we kind of have to navigate like that. How big is the issue? How much of a problem that we need to complain about? Who's going to listen to us and what they're going to do about it? But then the conversation started to change. I think going through that and having people that really wanted to listen, and some of that I kept saying with people is like, this is not new, what we're talking about. As Briana said there, it's not an American issue. It's not, as a Londoner, I've had people telling me that London is a racist place, but I've experienced a lot here in Scotland. Working in the care sector, when I first started here, working in a nursing home, there's a lot of stuff that I'd never heard when I was growing up that was just like, what is this? And is under banter. So how do you talk about that? How do you navigate that? So a lot of it was really, I had to step back and really build up on my own strength, because you need a lot of strength when you're talking about this. How am I going to navigate this? I did a podcast where it was almost like a cleansing of, right, I'm going to face up, I'm going to step up. But it's also understanding the reactions, the things that are going to be said to us online when we start to speak up, you know, the trolling and whatnot. What's the protection there? Who's going to be there to back us up when things get nasty? Because it does, right? You mentioned equality, suddenly you get a troll jumping in there. So there's a lot of that kind of work, and also talking to people in the background who were saying that, yeah, this happens. You know, what's going on? Why suddenly everybody's jumping in? They're like, oh my gosh, now I see, you know, how are they going to help us? What's the action? What's the accountability? So I've taken a lot of time to try and get in and work with that, breaking down some of these structures that are blocking people, that are behind, you know, layers of stuff that we're not going to make the change if we don't face up to it. We're not going to make the change if we don't have these kind of conversations of what is it that we need, and how do we support people and let people that in the background who they want to say stuff, but they can't, because that fear of, if I say something, how is that going to impact me? As somebody in this space, I feel that, yeah, I have that responsibility of being a bit more vocal. Even then, things happen that I'm stepping back going, do I say something? How do I say, you know, how do I react to this? There's a lot of self-conversation that go in there. I'm still there. I'm still at my discovery of how much do I step up and speak out and, you know, and be a part of that change, because it has to, you know. I've got a 7-year-old here who I suddenly have to think, I'm going to have that conversation with her about racism. She's a mixed child, but she's going to have that other side of her, that she's going to have these things that happens to her, that I'm going to have that conversation. how many 7-year-olds here that you would have to have that conversation with? So there's a lot of that kind of thinking, and realizing that, again, there's not enough that's been done to support our young people with everything that's been going on, with the protests that's been going on, and reading about racism in secondary school in Scotland. There's not enough being done to support young people going through this in this pandemic and everything else. So thinking back to my own personal rage as an adult, how are our young people being looked after through this? So there's a lot of things to unpack, still unpacking, but we have to continue this. We have to continue the conversation, but bring in the accountability that actions are going to be taken as well.
Yeah, and I suppose it's about having these conversations out in the open so that people cannot be uncomfortable with having these uncomfortable conversations. Helena, you guys are two of the only, Black female founders in the kind of fintech space. Did you feel a responsibility? Did you feel that people were looking to you for comment at this time? And if so, how did that feel?
Yeah, actually, the other ladies were talking about statistics in their industries, and I was just sitting here thinking about our own Scottish fintech industry, and I'm just trying to play everybody that I know in this industry, thinking, is it just me and Tina, the two Black women in this fintech industry? And it's quite strange, because for me personally, I like to speak up, and it's something I'm proud of where I come from. I'm always telling stories about my culture, my Blackness. And when the whole Black Lives Matter thing happened, first of all, I was in shock. I have always been in shock in this, with the racist thing, because growing up in Uganda, it was never an issue. Like, you didn't realize you're Black, you're this, you're that. You knew that you're a person. And then coming to this country, you start to feel different, and that's okay. It is okay to be different, and it's okay to feel different. But it's when other people turn that into a negative, and they make you feel like, oh, you don't belong because you're Black, or because you're a woman, or because... And I had a lot of people reach out to me personally, and they started to ask me questions, which I thought was a very positive experience, because these are things that I would never come to you and say, what do you, you have a white privilege. You should use your white privilege to do blah, 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 blah. And when they're coming to me and asking me these questions, I feel empowered to educate them and say, listen, this is how you can use your white privilege to support Black businesses or the Black community, or how to work with our community anyway. But it's still like, I think Briana said, you still feel like, is it something I should be saying? Should I say it? How will I be viewed? Am I gonna lose a certain credibility because I'm using the color thing? Is it okay to speak about it? And the other good thing, that people were open to listen. They were open to hear. What are your experiences? What do you think we should do? I mean, I remember a colleague of mine that reached out to me. I'd worked with her so many years ago, about 7 years ago, I'd worked with her. And one time in the staff room, I called her out on something, and she went all emotional and she started crying. And I was thinking, I've done nothing wrong. Like, I've just called her out. And because I wasn't all so emotional, I wasn't the crying person, everybody started to blame me. And this girl reached out to me during that season to say, listen, I just realized that what I did at that time was wrong. Now, that is amazing. That is small changes for people to start realizing that, okay, this is how I act, or I perceive a Black person to be. And I guess for me, as I have kids as well. I have mixed race kids. It was very, very difficult for me to think, okay, they already don't think they're white, they're Black, they're this, and now this, how am I gonna deal with it? On a personal level, I had my own challenges, and then you're seen as a business leader in the community having to say something. I remember a journalist reaching out to me and asking me so many questions. And then, somewhere in there, he said, oh, but so did you come to this country as a refugee? I've told you all the amazing things that my company is doing here in Scotland. And I called him out. I said, why does that matter? why can you not think about all the good things that I have told you about our business, what we've done, what we're doing as Black people? So it is quite challenging to think, should I speak on it? Should I say something? Should I go on social media and speak up? How will people view me? Am I using the race card, the Black this, the Black that? So it is still a bit of a challenge, but you know, at least people are more receptive to listening.
So Tina, I remember at the start you mentioned growing up in Uganda, you didn't obviously have this perception of yourself and your identity of being Black or having this sense of otherness. Could you talk a little bit about, you know, what that was like when you came to Scotland, and there's this different view? I think that the other panelists will be able to jump in on this as well, but I'd like to start with you. Have we still got Tina? She's muted.
Yes, can you hear me, guys?
Absolutely.
Yes, I was saying that just to resonate with what the others are saying is, one of the key things that hit me when the whole George Floyd thing happened was how I myself had changed, and how I was starting, my views on life had started changing when I came to Scotland. And as Briana said, it's small things that happen over time that you don't realize, that you keep letting go of, you know, a little bit at a time. And my background is in law, so I'm very used to challenging stuff. I'm used to speaking up for myself. I don't let a wrong go wrong. You know, I don't let a wrong go. I correct someone if they've done something wrong, and I'm quite capable of fighting for myself. So I always felt like, you know, I was dealing with this properly. I didn't care. You know, I could shrug off racism. I've had several racial incidents, but, you know, I can shrug them off. I feel like I'm in a good place economically and all this. So I've never really had this direct corrosion with racism, so to speak. So when the George Floyd thing happened, my biggest thing was, what about my children? So I'm this person. I've been shaped from how I've been brought up.
We're at the victim of the train Wi-Fi again.
If I may.
Sorry, Tina. Yeah, jump in.
Yeah, we'll wait for Tina to come back. Hopefully she does. Yeah, I think particularly being an American who's been in Edinburgh for 10 years, I grew up in Washington, D.C., which is ethnically a predominantly Black city, but because of the government.
I'm a very confident person, 5 years old. That's, you know, from the community I come from, I'm still very Scottish. My daughter, can you hear me? Hear me?
Yes, please.
Yeah, you went out for a minute, Tina, but you've come back in.
I apologize. Yeah, so I was saying that the whole thing just got me thinking about my children. You know, children who have been brought up here with an African heritage, but they feel very much Scottish. And also, on the other hand, being a business leader, it's like, how can I be positive for the business community that's African? You know, how can I empower my children? But also, how do I make sure that my business is still not seen in a light? Because I don't want it to be painted a certain way. And it's a very, very, very big topic to tackle. So I spent a few weeks literally just trying to sift through my own perception of myself now that has become, you know, because over time you start thinking of yourself differently, unknowingly. You start realizing, I realize I'm a woman now, something I never knew. I didn't ever think I was a woman. I didn't ever think I was Black, but more and more every day now, it's something that as the day goes by, you think about it at least once, right? So it's like, how do I empower my children? How do I empower my customers? Because we work with a lot of diverse people and we want them to continue celebrating that. How do I bring my original, authentic self and show up every day as a business leader? And that can be quite a challenge. But as everyone else has said, the conversations are starting to be had. When someone reaches out to you and asks you, it's like, how can I role model this behavior? From when my children were young, I have always drummed into them never to play the race card, you know. Don't say someone has been racist to you unless they've actually been racist to you. But I found myself asking myself, what is racism? How do they know what racism is? Is it if someone says you're ugly? Is it if someone says you're too dark, you know? And how as an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old do you address that? So for me, it's a big reflection on the bigger picture of how we positively come out of this space and how we empower not just ourselves, but our colleagues, because there is also that unconscious bias we're talking about. So the uncomfortability of someone sitting with you and trying to understand how to approach you, for example, there is that issue. So we're not the only ones that are struggling. The people that are trying to relate to us are struggling as well. And so as a business, it's how do you remain a Black business, but a Scottish business at the same time without compromising anyone and letting them go. And it can be quite challenging.
Yeah, and it's great to hear that you are seeing the positives in these big conversations and the responsibilities that you feel you can enact into the next generation. I mean, that's really what this is all about. It's about education. We're all a work in progress. We've all got things to learn. You never stop learning. And as a society, we can always progress in a positive direction. I'm conscious I want to let you finish, Briana. You were saying, you know, coming from America and then coming into the academic space, you know, how was that for you as a Black woman?
I'll be quick because I know it's time for Q&A. I think for me, coming from a part of the country that, you know, there's a lot of racism, but most of the police officers in Washington, D.C. are Black, you know, and that kind of police brutality exists. But, you know, we need to understand that the United States is a huge and massively diverse country. But that said, I think being away from the States and coming here as a Black, an African-American woman from the US, it was a real breath of fresh air. You know, I felt I was facing less racism, less unconscious bias. But I have to say, over the last 10 years, that feeling of being othered, being considered Black, and what that means, you know, the racism has increased because of Brexit and because of so many other factors. I'm not in the safety of an academic environment, but I think that said, the conversations that we're having about racism and understanding what it means and how that overlaps with so many other things like gender and class and sexual orientation and ability is really positive. And I think the fact that we're looking at ways that we can address that even more is really important. But I think that unconscious bias and the microaggressions and the soft parts of racism that are harder to detect is what I think we're actually finally getting to a point of understanding is just part of the wider umbrella. But I would say that, you know, everyone's experience of their own Blackness is different, you know, and is different depending on where you've been born, where you've lived. And, you know, I think people starting to realize and understand that Blackness is not one thing. It's a beautiful, diverse set of experiences, I think is also really important too.
Well said.
So cool. So cool. And just as we're starting to round off before we head to the next section, I'd like to put a question to each of you, please, to give me some short, sweet bites to. And it's specifically around privilege, or rather the levels of perception within privilege. Does it open doors? Are there pros and are there cons to it? I know from my experience working, even just being in an organization like Accenture has given me a lot of opportunities to speak on technology and inclusion, diversity, and a number of different things, which have in turn also helped with my business ventures. And then it just loops around. But for example, for somebody who isn't in that professional position, you know, that's a privilege that I have. So if I can start with yourself, please, Briana. So privilege, levels of perception, does it open doors or are there cons to it?
I think so. Nick and I were having this conversation about accents. I'm aware that my accent sometimes gets me to places, or even names. You know, before a person has met me and heard me on the phone, I then get the "ooh, hello," but you have to interact with me because you invited me. But I am aware that living here in Scotland, that sometimes my accent does get me to places, and you know, people listen to me. They have their conversations with me as well. But yeah, it's just. I don't know if anyone else, but that I just find that just listening to people, the way they interact with people. I've been in spaces where somebody who sounds more African compared to me, I know that I'm being heard. For example, my first job in the care industry, I was the spokesperson for the African nurses. They were nurses. I was just a care assistant, but their matron would listen to me. because I was one of them, as they put it to me. So things like that, things that people felt comfortable saying to me that they wouldn't say to other people. And I'm very aware of it. And I feel that responsibility of changing that perception, changing the mindset.
Nice, nice. And for yourself, please, Briana?
I don't think privilege is a negative thing by itself. And I think, you know, at the moment with words like male privilege, white privilege, all sorts, people have a tendency to get defensive about privilege, right? And I think that when it comes to diversity and inclusion and these issues, you know, another term that's become really popular is intersectionality. And I've heard so many discussions about people saying it's a buzzword, it's too academic, what does it even mean? We have to remember that all of us have levels of privilege and all of us have levels of marginalization, some more than others, and some so much more that they have a lot more power over others. But I actually think when it comes to privilege, you know, I'm privileged because I'm American, I'm privileged because I grew up in a middle class background, but also I have a disability, I'm Black, I'm a woman. All of those things layer and intersect, that's intersectionality. And I think actually by better understanding our privileges, we do have a responsibility then to see where our privileges are and think about who we can support as a result. You know, instead of pulling the ladder up after us, you know, who do we leave that down for? Who do we reach out to? What education and what opportunities do we have to show people their own privilege in relation to others? I think a lot of times it's not intentional. You know, it's just built into the way our society is, but I think we really need to kind of take the emotions and defensiveness out of privilege and just understand that it simply exists. It's no one's fault. They were born into what they were born into, but okay, use that privilege and take responsibility for it and think about how to help others rather than see that being pointed out as being an attack. I think that's a healthy, positive way forward. I acknowledge my own privileges, and I'm aware of them, and then I make sure that others that don't have the same that I do have access, because it's so important to making sure that people that have a diversity of experiences and opinions are shaping our world.
Absolutely. So from that, I take own your privilege and use it to do something good rather than shying away from it or feeling as if somebody is attacking you purely because of said privilege that you haven't earned. Nice one. And how about yourself, Helena?
Yeah, I spoke a little bit earlier about how some colleagues of mine were reaching out to me and asking me about what do you think about this, Black Lives Matter, white privilege. And I actually felt like maybe I need to start a movement called Privilege for Good. So you need to find your privilege and use it for good. You know, what is your privilege? And like Briana said, it's not a bad thing. Myself and Tina were constantly seen as the two Black girls in the fintech sector. How do we use that? How do we use it to make sure that we are visible, we are seen, our business is thriving? You know, be it they might be saying that for the sake of maybe ticking some boxes or whatever. How do we use that privilege for good? And it's important that we all see what privilege we have and we use it to help other people, to create impact within communities that we work with, to educate other people about their privileges and how those privileges can help. Like I was educating my colleagues about how their white privilege can help through the Black Lives Matter.
100%. Do you have anything to add to that, Tina?
Yes, I think mine is, I'll use the word ambidextrous, being ambidextrous. So having different viewpoints is an amazing privilege because you don't just have one viewpoint. You've lived in two different cultures, you've lived in more than one culture. So you always see things from a different side of things. And the more we can embrace that and try to add that into everything we do, that is a big privilege, which I think we should be proud of and start embracing. And I like what Briana said about you know, not shying away from your privilege. It's okay to be privileged. It's how you utilize it. So yeah, ambidexterity, just understanding that people have different viewpoints because they come from different cultures can be amazing. And so how do we channel that and help people to start seeing things from different lenses.
I love that. So this has been a very rich conversation, and we've covered a lot of ground in a very short amount of time. There's still plenty more that we could unpack from this in terms of how our identity shapes our business motivations. Now, I like to end this with some killer questions, but we've only got time for one. So I'm going to hit each of the panel with this. If there's someone in the audience tonight or someone that watches this back with the clips that we share that feels they've resonated with your story, what advice would you give them about finding their identity and being resilient and using that voice and that energy for good? Start with you, Briana.
I would say go for it. I think things that I've taken time to find my way and go for it and overthink things, and going for it now, it's just making it happen and create that environment around you. Reach out to people. As we were saying here, sometimes you can have people who want to ask you questions that might not be comfortable, but if you're willing to engage and talk, go for it. But go for it. Don't shy away and ask. You can reach out to us, or reach out to me. I don't mind it. I'm sure the others wouldn't mind either. But yeah, go for it. That's it. That's
great advice. Helena, advice for someone who might resonate with your story so far?
Yeah, mine is, I think you have a right to be where you want to be and where you are. Like, never feel any less because you're Black, or because you're a woman, or because you're from Africa, or whatever. You have every right, like a person. I know that a lot of African people, we have a tendency of feeling grateful for being in this country because, oh, we're in the UK, but we're here, we're paying taxes, we're here, you know, most of us are here legally. So it's, you know, it's not, we're not any lesser than a Scottish person who was born here. As long as we're contributing to the community, we are contributing to the system. Yeah, you have every right to be where you are and where you want to be.
That's beautifully put. Briana, advice for people who might have resonated with your story this evening?
I would say that identity and how that shapes our own experiences is the most exciting part of life, that it takes different perspectives and experiences to create something disruptive, new, different, innovative, and that embracing that and embracing your own perspective, where sometimes it feels maybe unusual or unheard, is your greatest assets. So I would say that let that guide you and let your own experiences and inner voice lead with that, because I think that's where you kind of not even add value, forget adding value. That is kind of where you create it. And don't forget that.
Beautifully put. And last but not least, Tina, with your train of thoughts, can you give some advice for people that might appreciate your journey?
I think the biggest thing for me that I've learned over this season, or generally, is be unapologetically authentic. You are uniquely you. It's okay to be passionate. It's okay to have a belief system that's different. You have to be unapologetically authentic, and you have to embrace it and make sure that you use your uniqueness for the good of others and those around you. That's the key thing for me.
That's huge. We all do have individual gifts to share, and finding that confidence to put them out there is the only thing holding us back, I think, sometimes. Dec, I'm sure there's been a good bit of chat. I've seen Twitter, I've seen the Zoom chat. Is there any questions you want to throw to our panel quickly?
Yes, I'm conscious of time, guys. But I just wanted to say thank you. You know, I think that the conversation around privilege, you know, I really resonate with as a white guy, to state the obvious. So in terms of questions, we had a really great one actually from David earlier, but I thought, given the direction we're going in terms of the chat, might be good actually to ask more of a action-based question. So hypothetically, if you were, say, in Nick or I's position, we're Startup Guide Scotland, we've got this platform of entrepreneurs, we want to inspire, educate, connect people in Scotland and further afield. What would you guys say would be maybe a starting point, or one thing that we can do to help specifically. And I'll come to you, Briana, first, if that's okay.
Sure. I would say that take the opportunity to ask the community what diversity they think is missing and they would like to see, and then make commitments to the community to address that, whether or not it's through volunteer recruitment drives, whether or not it's through great events like this, but asking the community and having a dialogue so that the community can hold Startup Grind accountable and not just make statements or make commitments without having the community in dialogue, I think is a really good way to kind of move the conversation forward and take action that people are comfortable with and that will progress the community as a whole.
Awesome, thank you. Boy, you hear me typing notes already, so thank you, Briana. Awesome. So I'll come to you, Briana, next. What's your thoughts?
Same. Have people take over. I would say give this up to the youth, the young people, especially in the community that might feel like they don't have a space when they can't see what's out there for them. Let's invite them. Let's give them that platform, and again talk to them and ask them what do they want, rather than us assuming what they need and want. I think now is the time to actually open up and let them lead. This platform is a perfect place for them to lead.
Awesome, thank you. And so we'll come to you, Helen, next.
Yeah, just to say, maybe don't assume as well. There's so many things that are assumed, and it's very easy to fall into a trap. But I think we were talking with Nick earlier, or maybe yesterday, that there is so many communities that are created out of other communities because they are different. And therein lies a problem of, you know, creating a women's accelerator out of an accelerator. Why do you need to do that? You know, you can create the community without having to separate and segregate and digest or dissect different groups. So yeah, just think about what, even just tonight, my takeaway is how many people, Black women in the fintech businesses, can I support? Because I know there's loads of women that want to make a difference within financial education, but do I know where they are? You know, can I reach out to them? Can I be that ladder that they help, you know, that's helping them to climb up to create that diversity in the fintech industry? So don't assume, educate yourself, and let's try not to create small portions of pots of different people.
Excellently put. And come to you, Tina, if you've got some semi-decent connection.
Yeah, so mine would be have meaningful conversations. When you're doing business or anything that you do, you use a smart approach. I found the smart approach to be the best way to do things. This has to be used even in this context. You have to have specific conversations that are leading you to a certain measurable outcome. You know, conversations for the sake of conversations, accelerators for the sake of accelerators cannot do anything. We have to be purposeful, we have to be purpose-driven, be meaningful, and have a measurable target. Accountability is very key. You have to set out knowing exactly what you're trying to achieve, why you're trying to achieve it, communicate that very clearly to all the stakeholders, involve the people you're trying to, you know, to reach, and then make sure you've measured it, it's targeted, you're addressing it, and you're open to feedback and discussion. We must take a smart approach. Otherwise, conversations for the sake of conversations will remain conversations. They've been conversations for many years. Until we take a smart approach to everything we do, it's in vain.
It's an excellent point to finish on. So thank you, Tina. It's very well put indeed. Awesome. So I'll come back to you, Nick, if that's okay. Conscious of time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. To wrap up.
Indeed. Well, it's been a huge conversation. I know it's been a little bit different from the usual fireside chats of growing a business and getting investment, but when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, it really is about the stories and the experiences of the people who we admire and who lead in our business community. So with that being said, I want to give a very heartfelt thanks to Briana Pagado, Briana Maya, Helen, Roger, and Tina Matembe for bringing their experiences, their honesty, their truths, and their advice to us this evening. And a very special thanks to my co-host Janet for helping me out with some of these big topics. In terms of what's coming up next for Startup Grind, at the end of this month, we have got another great Black leader. We have got Finn Mpofu, who is the man who actually brought Startup Grind to Scotland, in conversation with Johnny and the Glasgow team on the 27th of October. I'll just drop the link in the chat in a second. And then in November, we're having a special panel looking at ethical consumerism in the lead up to Christmas. We're joined by Karis and Ayush from Social Stories Club. We mentioned them at the top. We've got Roxy Rocks from Cafe Direct talking about sustainable supply chains with coffee, and Jeremy Warner from Corporate Social Responsibility Startup Power a Life. Thank you all so much for being with us tonight. I just want to leave us with the wise words of social philosopher and hip hop entrepreneur Jay-Z, who says, "Identity is a prison you can never escape, but the way you redeem your past is not to run from it, but to try to understand it and to use it as a foundation to grow." And we've definitely all got lots of growing up to do, but I hope conversations like this have helped us. So thank you again to everyone, and we'll see you next time.